Welcome to the Biblically Discerning Podcast, where we seek to have intentional and thoughtful conversations about theology and life. We want to walk in truth and grace the way that God designed us to live. So with that said, let's get into this week's podcast. Welcome back to another week. It has been quite a long time since we've recorded, and Leia had a good topic, I think, hopefully. We'll see.
Maybe. You said, stop, hold that thought.
Yeah, before we talk about it and then talk about it again, let's just talk about it one time. So it is the moral implications of voting.
Yeah. Just because I was thinking about it the other day, election coming up, but I've thought about it in the past because people often with political moral questions tend to pull the card of be subject to your governing authorities, right? Well, there's kind of a hang up with that in the U.S. because our governing authorities, by the very nature of their structure, are supposed to be subject to the people. And so it puts us in this weird situation where, yes, we should be subject to the governing officials, but also technically speaking, the government officials are our employees and we're supposed to vote in order to change policy, and we actually have civil liberties that are protected in order to protest governmental activities that we oppose. And so it's kind of an odd situation because we're not under a king. We're not under any sort of like enforced or I guess artificially imposed rule. More so now than when the founders first established the U.S. But it makes for an odd paradox when trying to deal with like moral issues in the political sphere and the social sphere in America. Zach is going to reply. He's just got to get our dog from eating something.
Yeah, she was eating my shoe.
Oh,
I heard her wrestling with something. Like, that doesn't sound like anything that she should be wrestling with.
Should have given her stuffed animal.
I didn't know where it was. I was just stopping her, and she looked at me and knew. So,
good.
Yeah, she doesn't know what to do in here, apparently. She doesn't want to be separated from us, but apparently doesn't like it in here. Or doesn't know what to think of it.
Yeah. Zach and I just got a new dog, so we'll see.
She looks like a dingo.
She does. She came from the shelter, and she looked like a wild dog.
Yep.
Anyway, your thoughts? So you weren't listening to a word I said? No.
A little distracted. So I never thought about it on the way you just explained it, to where, yeah, we don't have a king, and the government's supposed to be run by us and for us. So it does put us in a weird position because they're theoretically representing what we want our government to be doing, instead of us just having to obey like Scripture commands us to. And so, yeah, I didn't actually think about that. So,
and yeah, like not even just that, but we have civil disobedience protected in our own founding documents for our government. And so, like, how do you reconcile that with, what Jesus said to be, subject to the governing authorities, to give to Caesar what is Caesar's, right? I think that kind of comes down to a discernment thing and, the leading of the Holy Spirit. But what's fascinating is, like, yes, we have those abilities, but I think the U.S. church has failed not so much in, steering political movements, but rather we have failed socially because of the political stability that the U.S. gave the culture. So we all kind of just assumed this surface level Christianity. And so we kind of assumed that it would always be that way. But now we're kind of seeing the results of, a very superficial form of Christianity.
Interesting side note on that, since I just recently went through church history too.
Ooh.
We learned all about this kind of stuff. So, to be honest, once we went through it, it's kind of fictional that America was Christian. The closest that it actually got was in the 1900s, to where it was largely Christian, and what we tend to think that America was this Christian country. But it was I'm thinking 60%, but I honestly don't remember. That's just what's in my head. But majority were always non-Christians. You just have these numerous denominations, for one, that pop out because they're wanting freedom and away from the king, away from authorities, away from the traditional way
Centralized
of
power.
yeah, the traditional church and what it does and how it functions, which they threw out creeds and doctrines and such, and so you have lots and lots of whack people out of it. And so there's a lot of evangelism, a lot of revivalism, but that's
Out of curiosity, who are they evangelizing to?
everyone.
No. So my question is, what were the prevailing ideologies other than Christianity at the time?
Like religions?
Well, yeah. So today we kind of have this like secular humanist type ethos in America. What's interesting is it's kind of falling into paganism now, where you have a lot more of these like earth worshiping type people, which again is very pagan. Where there's like, it's just like the universe, and energies and vibes and blah, 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 blah. And it's, again, very pagan, which they think is just like New Age, but New Age is also pagan. Anyway, so my question is, that's what we're facing today.
Yeah.
What were the other ideologies that we were evangelizing to in the time frame that you're talking about? What did you say, the early 1900s?
I'm talking about the beginning of America as a independent nation, all the way up through the 1900s.
So in the 18th, so I guess end of the 18th century.
Yeah, so in that time, we didn't really, from what I've read in my lectures, wasn't really taught of any other religion besides, the Indians or Native Americans. My bad.
Yeah, whatever. Moving on.
Whatever their religion was, but that wasn't really in competition with any other religion for the white folk coming over. So my guess is they were agnostic or atheist. My guess is agnostic.
I would say atheism
is more new.
Well, yeah, for it to be widespread. Like, I think there's always been people like, you know what? I just think the world is all that there is and there is no God, right? There's always going to be those people. But I think it was more widespread for people like, oh, yeah, there's a God, but I don't mess with him. He doesn't mess with me.
Yeah, and I say agnostic because you had people coming over from other countries. We'll just say like England, where you're forced to go to the Anglican church at the time, or Catholic, whatever, the king was feeling that day.
Whichever the king wanted, yeah.
So they were forced to do it, otherwise they'd be punished. And so you don't have really a... Wow, she's really getting into that.
Yeah, so if y'all can hear that, that is the sound of a dog dismembering a husky.
A stuffed animal.
Yeah.
Not a real one.
Wow. Anyway.
So you have them coming over from England. So they finally have freedom from religion or organized religion. And so my thought process and what it seemed like was agnostic, because they knew of a God, but they didn't really believe it because they were forced into it, and lots of people don't like to be forced into
Tale
things.
as old as time. Church hurt.
That's my guess. And so then you have them coming over and having freedom to do whatever they want. And then you have their kids who know nothing because they have kids and they don't know anything about church or Jesus or anything like that. And so I think over time those generations would be the ones they were evangelizing to.
Yeah. So you kind of have like this post-Christian, almost like neo-savage type situation, because also at the time people weren't connected by, telephone technology. If you lived in a city, that's about as connected as you get. Otherwise, if you lived on your own land out in the middle of nowhere, just you and your family,
yeah,
then you're just on your own little island out there in the wilderness trying to survive.
And I would even point you to some of the founding fathers of the nation. You always think that the nation is Christian because of what it says in the Constitution and all that, but they were really just agnostic.
Not all the founding fathers. Some of
Yeah,
them
I'm saying
were able to to quote.
Hey, sorry.
Were able to quote the Bible like chapter and verse. Who were.
Cables.
We now interrupt your regularly scheduled programming for Zach getting after the dog for chewing up technology. In fairness, we literally got her yesterday, so she's trying to figure out her life.
She was eating a power cord plugged in.
Oh, dog. It's like you want to die.
She unplugged it though. And
Oh,
then
good
was
for her.
chewing it. So I guess she knows safety.
Right, because that was intentional.
Sorry for that. That was probably very abrupt of a no.
No!
I saw the cord.
You're wrong.
I was like, uh-oh. So, yeah, not all of them obviously were not Christian, but you have, was it like Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, who were...
But even them, though, they were more like deists, right? Where they believed
Yeah.
in God, but again, it was more of a, he leaves me alone, I leave him alone.
That's what I'm saying, is it's people like that.
Yeah. Which
you have-
also, again, were kind of like moral pragmatists, right? So they thought it was good for society, but they themselves did not necessarily abide by it.
It's funny is, in our modern time,
Darwin.
no, Richard Dawkins.
Oh, yeah.
Him, he's not all about Christianity, but he's still, completely against it, but he doesn't want to live in a society that does not have it.
Of course not, because it's the best thing to happen to society since... that it just is the best thing to ever happen to society, especially for women. Oh my gosh, women who want to live in a different culture. I'm like, have you lost your mind? Have you looked into any other culture, any other time in history, anything? Or are you just stupid? And that sounds strong, but I really mean it, because you have more rights, more protections, more freedom than you did at any other time in history under any other culture.
Yeah. He calls himself a cultural Christian.
Who?
Richard Dawkins.
Oh, a lot of people do, because they want the what is it, the products, the benefits of Christianity without any of the commitment.
Yeah. Anyway, that all to say, that's who I think they were evangelizing to at the time, and that what we think was a Christian nation from
It was
class
roughly
and all that.
60% Christian.
No, 60% not.
It's like the HBU campus.
Maybe that's what I'm thinking of when I'm thinking of the percentage, but I'm not entirely sure.
I gotta fact check this later.
Yeah. Anyway, that's what we read and what we were taught through our class, and seeing the examples, it makes sense. More agnostic than anything. Anyway, back on topic to voting.
Well, anyway, regardless of the, motivations or proclivities of the founding fathers, the system that they established put Christians in an interesting pickle, because we're supposed to be the, progenitors of government, but then we're also supposed to be subject to it. It's like I am my own grandpa type situation. It's like, what am I supposed to do? Which I think probably has more to do with like advocating for the things that you think are good and true and honorable, but then abiding by the law so far as your conscience allows you to. Because again, that's give unto Caesar what is Caesar's and unto God what is God's, because Christians were notorious for being civilly disobedient if it breached God's law. Because ultimately our allegiance is to him first and then to others second.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Oh.
I thought you were going to keep going.
I guess the thing from here is, how does that translate into how we actually do go about like civil engagement and voting and stuff like that?
Yeah. So it probably go back to what we were talking about on our walk a little bit ago with the little podcast I had listened to, which talked about just because you have to pick between two evils doesn't mean that you should be picking an evil anyway. Because a lot of people like to say that, in 2016, 2020, and now 2024, all those elections, just got to pick the better of two evils. I had at least heard that a lot. And
I mean, I feel like that happens every election cycle.
I think more or less. But just you think that you're backed into a two-choice selection, but that doesn't mean that you have to choose one of those two.
Mm-hmm. Which a lot of people will be like, well, I mean, if you're not supporting the one guy, then it's basically a vote for the other guy, because then you're throwing away your vote. Yes, it is true. In a lot of cases, like if you take away your support for one side, you're giving an advantage to the other. But at some point or other, if it gets bad enough and both sides are morally bankrupt enough, there needs to be a shift to a new solution, right? If A and B have gone sour, it's time to go to plan C, which I think we've actually been way overdue for a long time. Bigger problem is most people don't have a conscience to vote on anyway, because most people today are just moral pragmatists. They're moral when it suits them and when it is beneficial.
And then when it's beneficial for them not to be, then they don't.
Mm-hmm. Most people, just thinking of small things, the vast, vast majority of people will lie in order to make things easier for themselves. Mm-hmm. And it's not even like huge moral qualms, right? It's like if I don't lie, then they're going to, kill the Jews I'm hiding in my basement, right? It's not even stuff like that. It's like your boss asked you what happened with your proposal this weekend, and you're like, oh, I'm sorry, the Wi-Fi went out at my house. Big lie. But it made your life easier. Like, what would have been the worst thing? To be like, I'm really sorry, I was working on family stuff and I just forgot, Mm-hmm. Either way, he's going to be mad it's late. Just in one case you lied to him, one case you didn't.
It gives you what you think is a better excuse.
Yeah. And that actually extends to a lot of things. A lot of people do not need much pushing to do some deeply immoral things.
Yeah. And there's the whole thing where the government tests the population.
Where did you hear that? You said that the other day, and I'm like, what are you talking about?
What is it? Test the population for?
Compliance.
Compliance, yeah. I know I heard it again with the same podcast that was talking about don't pick between two evils, basically. Or you don't have to. And it's the podcast title, I'll give it, doesn't mean that I support it. I'm
not a sponsor.
I am undetermined. I have not determined what I think of it yet. Because it goes into the conspiracy theory side of things.
Funsies.
But it's called Not by Works Ministries. And it was probably the one that was labeled Trump something, something, something. And they list the topics they're going to talk about. Anyway, that one had Zach from Wretched Watchmen. YouTube channel is what it's called.
I was like, what are you talking about?
If they want to find the specific one I'm talking about.
Oh,
so
gotcha.
He's on that one. And that's where I heard it again. I've also talked to some of my customer clients or whatever for work who are conspiracy theorists. They label themselves as it, but also they don't, because they believe that a lot of the things they believe are true.
I mean, wouldn't be a true conspiracy theorist if you didn't believe the conspiracy.
So, anyway, to go back to the compliance thing, yeah, the government periodically, the podcast was talking about, it used to be every 20 or something years they would test the population for compliance, and now it's almost down to 5 to 10 years. They keep testing the population for compliance to see how far they can push the population to do what they want and how much they can control.
Yeah, I gotta say, I was deeply shocked at people's willingness to be under house arrest during COVID. I was shocked. I was like, how on earth are we putting up with this?
They actually talked about that and how it was illegal for what they did, something like that.
Oh, yeah. It was a gigantic overreach of executive power. Just gigantic. And no one ever questioned it. Or if they did question it, then they were called like enemies to public health and, inciting, mass public health issues and like all of this stuff. And in other countries, people who dissented were arrested and thrown in jail,
Yep.
which is crazy. And I think there were actually a few arrests in the United States. I remember there were also like snitch lines in some states. Actually, Walls was that's one of the things that they get after him for. He set up a snitch line in Michigan, I believe. And you could basically just tattletale on your neighbor and they'd come and like bust you for having people over. And then the thing that just really blew my mind is how people were still advocating for it, even though they knew the people promoting and enforcing it were not following the same guidelines. So like Governor Gavin Newsom, who had so many COVID restrictions, was found like out at a restaurant with a bunch of people at Thanksgiving. Was like, what the heck, man? Why aren't you getting arrested and fined?
Yeah, I remember those back in the day.
Yeah. And one recently came out about one of the major health organizers in New York who was literally, and this is not a joke, hosting drug-addled orgies with friends and acquaintances and associates during COVID lockdowns. Like, not kidding, like caught on tape talking about this. And just so many things. And it is mind-blowing to me that people were willing to listen to these people.
Well, it goes back probably to the family unit, but public school and the way that you're trained to comply. I went to public school. You if you do anything out of line, you're just sent away and you get in trouble, and then you don't graduate, and your whole life's a mess.
And now my life's ruined.
But yeah, they do that. Since I was in kindergarten.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting too, just like our difference in mindset, because there's a lot of things like, oh, you're not supposed to do this, and for you, like, oh, you just don't. And I'm like, well, why? I want there to be good reasons behind why I do or do not do things.
And I just have a now moral, quote unquote, compass of, like, if we're in public, like, I don't do that. I don't go over there, or I don't know what you would do, but
who knows, really.
And I just don't, because to me that's wrong, because that
you would have gotten in trouble for it in school.
Yeah.
Like, I'll sing in public. And you're like, well, you can't be loud like that. Like, I'm outside. Who cares? I'm in a parking lot. No one cares. If they do, cool. I'm in an open parking lot. It does not affect them. I can't remember. There was something else the other day, and you said you don't do that. And I'm like, well, why? Like, because you're not supposed to. I'm like, why am I not supposed to? And you couldn't give me a reason. I'm like, well, then there's not a good reason.
I don't remember. I think it was, we were somewhere and you were doing something. A good example. I felt that way yesterday while we were at Petco. Like, with the dog on the bed. I felt like you shouldn't do that, because if you were, you should buy the bed. Silly, like, small things like that.
Oh, because she was, like, sniffing and clawing at that one bed. She didn't rip anything. She wasn't chewing on it. She wasn't messing with it. So.
No, but it just shows that, like, stuff, I wouldn't allow her to do anything like that, because to me that's wrong. Anyway, back to the compliance thing. You're bred for compliance, and now you have a bunch of youngins, my age,
if they're told not to do something, it's like, oh, okay.
I mean, they follow the government just as they did their teachers and such in public school. They can't do anything against it because they're the upper level and you can't get there.
Yeah. And if you disobey, you go to timeout, which is prison.
Or now it's just you go home and you can't leave, and they pay you for it.
Yeah, I know. House arrest. What a joke. Because we have so many people in jail that we can't house them and, still sustain our budget, but whatever.
But yeah, they'll send them home, and then they can get a job, but they get paid if they don't.
If they don't, yeah. But don't you worry, guys. We'll be getting taxpayer-funded transgender treatment for illegal immigrants. That's the key issue. Oh, boy.
What?
No, that's a real thing. That Kamala Harris wants to do. She thinks it's a humanitarian issue to get transgender treatment to illegal immigrants via taxpayer funding.
Wow.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, back to moral implications of voting.
Anyway, sorry, that amongst many things is why I'm actually vehemently against Kamala Harris, is that she is morally bankrupt as a person in every policy that she actually deigns to reveal, because for a long time she wouldn't reveal any whatsoever, and she just pretended like all of her previous policy stances, her last presidential run, and while she was, vice president and running the country for Joe Biden, didn't exist. Anyway, all of them are just so deeply morally bankrupt. I just cannot abide voting for her. Both her stances on transgenderism, morality, abortion, all of them are just devoid of morality, devoid of any sort of semblance of righteousness, and I just can't. And a lot of people think, well, Trump isn't any better. I'm like, yeah, but Trump isn't for the wholesale genocide of the unborn. And she is. They literally had abortion, like vans parked outside the DNC. And she has said repeatedly that it's something that she has a passion for. And isn't that just horrifying for someone to say that they have a passion for making sure mothers can kill their children before they're born? And I know they don't put it that way, but
yeah,
still.
I was going to say they don't believe that it's a child, so.
Even still, that is a human being. And
Well, that's the thing, they don't believe that.
well, even that they can't deny medically. Regardless of if you want to say that human being has moral value or not, which is a dicey position to take, any medical personnel worth their salt, or any biologist worth their salt, will tell you that is a new and unique human being that is created at conception.
The funny thing is, it goes back to, I think, the philosophical argument of just morality. And I was actually listening to Mike Winger about this. He had one of his 10 questions, and he got into it a little bit, where atheists, I think the question was, why are you so adamant that atheists are gullible? And so that was the first question that he was tackling. Anyway, within that was the whole, well, where's your grounds for morality as an atheist? And there is no grounds for morality, and eventually they are just moral, like we said at the beginning, when it's convenient. And so, going back to abortion, well, it's just not convenient, or the morality is gone. And so, sorry, it reminded me when you said that, when I was saying that they don't think that it's a human being that they're killing, right? And then you say, well, you can't do anything with it, and then it's arguing for the human being's value. There we go. Which then I would say would go to the argument for morality.
Well, yes. Well, and it really does come down to that, right? If you have lost a universal constant for morality, being, God in his full personhood, as outlined in the Bible, then where do you get your morality from? Because if you are fully atheist and you buy that whole cocktail of ideologies and you believe that nothing is deeply right or wrong, it all has to do with, evolution and survival, which is what you kind of have to believe, right? Because that's kind of the prevailing theory for why we even have morality, is that it is socially advantageous to behave morally. But if you look at it, it's really not. There are some nice behaviors toward other humans that are good. So like caring for your young, it kind of facilitates the ongoing of your genetic line. Working together with other humans is good because it helps you be able to defend a larger area, get more food, have other people care for your young. Like that is advantageous. However, the problem is, what do you do when it's no longer advantageous, right? So that's kind of where the loss of value in the human being comes in, because if it is no longer advantageous to care for that human for you, well, then now it's fine. which is really what they're saying in the abortion argument, is it's not convenient for me to have this child.
It's my right to choose when I'm ready.
Yeah, again, I'm not ready. I don't want it. It's inconvenient to me. So I should be able to kill it because it cannot advocate for itself, which is really what it comes down to. If that child could speak, well, then, they wouldn't be able to deny its personhood. But there's a lot of people who can't speak, who are inconvenient, that we don't advocate for the wholesale slaughter of. Because if you really wanted to make arguments about, utility to society and personhood and consciousness, there is a lot of elderly people who don't meet those criteria. There's a lot of people in comas who are inconvenient to take care of. There's a lot of people with severe mental handicaps who you could say, oh, well, they're not really there. Yeah, you can't really qualify as, having personhood, and they're a drain on society, and they're inconvenient for me. I don't think I should have to take care of this person anymore. My husband had a traumatic brain injury, and I don't really want to pay for the medical bills for the rest of his life, so I'm just going to kill him. Like, people should feel that those things are deeply wrong, but you should also have a, grounded value for human life. If you don't, then it all comes down to convenience and what's beneficial or useful to you.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Then again, that's not far behind, actually. Because, assisted suicide is already a thing in Canada.
That's what I was going to say, the little tubes.
Yeah, literally, you climb into, you have to fill out a questionnaire and be, quote-unquote, cleared by a psychologist, which I'm not sure what psychologist ever got licensed who said, you know what, suicidal ideation, that's normal. I really don't know. But anyway.
Well, I mean, it all started way back when. Now, they can't say anything against anything pretty much nowadays.
Yeah, you can't say any sort of mindset is better or worse than another.
It's more of you're paying them so that you can vent to them and not help.
Yeah.
Only help in the way that you want them to.
Yeah. Help and make me feel better about the things that I already say, do, and believe.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, assisted suicide, euthanasia of the elderly or the terminally ill. These are things that are already happening in westernized countries. And obviously, leaving infants and the elderly or the disabled out to die is something that's been happening, in pre- and post-Christian cultures forever. But people like to pretend those don't exist because we think we're civilized, but we don't see the writing on the wall and how we treat our own young.
Mm-hmm. We're smarter.
That's been the downfall of almost every generation, coming around and thinking, okay, now we're advanced enough. We understand what our stupid ancestors didn't understand. So we know that reproductive rights are a universal human right. And I'm like, reproductive rights? What are you smoking? You already reproduced when you made a new individual human life.
It's my right, and I don't even know. It just sounds so wrong.
What they really mean is I should have a right to sleep with whomever I want and bear no consequences.
Even though they'll get diseases.
Mm-hmm.
And all this stuff.
You definitely can. And also the psychological implications of treating sex as transactional. People wonder why there's such a, epidemic of divorce and why there's no commitment in the culture. Because you treat the one thing that should bond you for life to a partner as something trivial and something common and something that bears no weight or consequence to it. Imagine. Shocking that has consequences in how people view long-term romantic relationships.
Yeah. The slow... Would it be degradation is the word? That... I don't know. It was introduced to us through the years, through Hollywood. Like, it started probably way better. Well, you can go back and look at older movies, and they're a lot more wholesome. Wholesome.
Oh, okay.
And they became more scandalous.
But what's interesting is what we consider as wholesome, like movies back in the day. were considered scandalous at the time. Which is funny because you can kind of see how the moral compass of the culture has faltered over time.
That's something actually. I know we're way off topic of
Civil implications.
Yeah, but it just reminded me of the way the early church and the Christians in, say, 100, 200, 300 AD treated the... I know it's different, but I've kind of wrestled with it a little bit. The gladiator games.
Mm-hmm.
In the book that I've been reading, Augustine's Confessions, he talks about one of his friends who is not a Christian, but, or was a Christian actually. No, he wasn't at the time, but was going to be later on. Thought that he could, in his own power, go to a gladiator game because he was being not forced, but he wouldn't go because just of how horrible they are.
Augustine or the friend?
The friend.
Okay.
And his friends begged him to go, and so he said, I'll go. I'll just close my eyes, and I won't watch, and I'll show them that I'm better, or whatever he said. And at one point, like at the beginning, there was hooping and hollering and cheering and all that, and he opened his eyes. Not even a second later was standing up and cheering along with everybody. And later on, he got way in deep with gladiator games, and then later on came out and became a Christian and actually a bishop. Anyway, that to say, it makes me wrestle with how Christians back then, completely against anything like that, makes sense because those are real people murdering each other, right? But with even movies and TV that has that, they're not real, but they are depicting or showing real murder, real everything.
Yeah. Which, I mean, people are like, oh, well, it's acting or it's CGI, whatever. But should we be viewing for pleasure immoral things, right?
That's the question I've been asking. Yeah.
Because I think most Christians, at least hopefully, should oppose, watching people having sex on TV. It's like, oh, well, it's not actually adultery. They're actors and they're acting. It's like, but still the thing that I'm watching is immoral.
And why is killing, like, I don't know why, this is the only thing I can think of right now, James Bond or Jason Bourne or stuff like that where they're agents assassinating people, why is that any different?
That's a good question.
Anyway, that's something I've been wrestling with, and yeah, it's fake, but it is showing or depicting real things.
Which I guess that's the difference between, like thematical elements and gore, right? So like in a lot of war movies, especially older ones, like you see the men running in the field and shooting, but in newer war movies, not only do you see the men running and shooting the gun, you then cut over to the person that they shoot and their chest explodes, like just stuff like that. It's like there's a difference between depicting, oh, this thing is happening in order to tell a story, and showing extremely violent graphic images.
Glorifying it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's something I've just been pondering. And it's... because you don't want to go, I guess, too far one way, but at the same time, that's exactly what the early Christians did. Even with the theater, they wouldn't go. Augustine, I haven't gotten to the point. I don't know if he gives it up, so I can't say if he does, but he loves the theater. I just can't remember if he gives it up.
And I think there are good aspects to those things, right? The theater and stories can be used to convey glorious things, right? I mean, the Bible itself uses story frequently to demonstrate good and true things, and even depicts horrible things in order to teach principles and lessons, right?
Yeah.
And so those things can be good. The problem is, what are you using, or I guess, what are you presenting? What are you supporting, right? In either your viewership or your production.
Yeah. And I guess more nowadays, it doesn't even matter the underlying message, because now you have the rise of anti-heroes and anti-villains or something like that.
Anti-villains are less common because I'd be a villain who is doing bad things for good. Never mind, that's still an anti-hero. I don't even know.
Yeah, it's where they take Thanos. It all happened with Thanos.
Oh, gosh.
Not really, but that's where I see the rise of a lot of those characters where they finally get you to sympathize with the villain, and then you think that they're the good guy. And that's probably partly because of our culture not caring about morals, and you sympathize with the bad side.
Yeah, I mean, that's been the spirit of the age forever. But I mean, that's been the goal of Satan from the beginning, right? To get you to question whether or not what God said is good is actually good. And what I mean by that is, again, we were talking about this a little bit earlier, the incredibly successful PR campaign the devil has been running, where he has, over time, been able to convince us, oh, demons aren't bad. The devil's not bad. Witches aren't bad. Magic's not bad. Voodoo's not bad. No. It's just misunderstood. You don't get it. You don't get why those bad people did what they did. And they try to get our own instinct to justify our sin to get us to excuse their sin. Because, oh, well, this thing happened to them, therefore they're justified in doing it. When in reality, horrible things happening to you do not give you a license to then go out and do horrible things. And if anyone was actually thinking about it, I think they would probably acknowledge that. Just because you were raped as a child does not mean that you then have license to go out raping children. It just doesn't. And so,
At least for now.
At least for now. Yeah, that's actually a thing. People are trying to say that pedophilia is an actually valid sexual orientation where you're just attracted to children. And I'm like, no one saw this? Oh, right, except for every conservative and Christian outlet who are like, hey, if you start normalizing sexually deviant behavior at the LGBT community, then you're going to end up with other things like pedophilia, bestiality, incest, all of these things, or necrophilia, like all of these things.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, oh, that's ridiculous, they said, but now it's happening.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's always the slow fade, right? You start with the more acceptable borderline sin first. It's not hurting anybody. It's between two consenting adults, blah, 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 blah. And then you creep on into the more and more...
How much can I get away with? It's just
exactly. The more and more extreme and, I guess, less socially acceptable.
Yeah. All that to say, the moral implications of voting.
Indeed.
I think it all fits because we are where we are, partly because of the government.
The government that we have allowed to get into power.
Allowed to get into power and not stand up against, or not even stand up against, but not change anything.
Yeah,
and I think it's
we've
also
not intervened.
Also our apathy as a culture, but also as Christians, and being conditioned to let let be, let it, no.
Live and let be.
Live and let be?
Yeah, live and let be. That's the thing.
Oh.
Anyway. Or live and let live, whichever.
Yeah, where you don't mess with your neighbor or whomever. You do your thing. Everyone does their own thing.
Which only works out to a point until your neighbor ends up, wanting to do bad things to you or another neighbor.
Yeah. And so it's very extreme, but the moral implications of voting is very high. And use that caution to do diligence, research, and come to the conclusion of who you vote for, who you don't vote for.
And pray about it.
Yeah.
And also, it's more than just voting. Like, Christians should be involved in, like, local small politics, because those things typically happen at a social level first, right?
Yeah.
So, like, the sexual revolution precluded all of these things that we have now in law. Like the change in what the government recognizes as marriage, and then the legalization of giving children puberty blockers and, you know, disfiguring their bodies. All of those things were downstream of social and cultural beliefs that start at a small level. What's taught in your school, right? What does your coach think? What does your coach believe? What does your school board believe? Right?
Yeah. So be active. Don't be passive.
Yeah, and don't be afraid of those who can kill flesh and bone, right? Be afraid of him who can rend soul and spirit.
Mm-hmm. So with that, I'm going to pray. Father God, thank you for this time and the knowledge that you've allowed us to talk about, and the things that are going on and positions that we're in. Help us to know what to do with voting and this November election. Give us wisdom, and let your will be done with who will be in office and what will happen in the future. Give us reassurance that no matter who's in office or what happens, that you're in control.